It started with a dog, or rather, something wearing a dog's skin. I thought I was doing the right thing when I put it down. But now, something far worse is stalking me. Had to clean up a few things first. The worst of it was the euthanol I used on Mutt. On my first day back, I staged an accident. I dropped the bottle and let it shatter across the floor. It complicated the logs, but it worked. I'm not proud of it. You shouldn't be either. But at the time, it felt like the only option. I was wrong. My first day back after a hiatus at home, I noticed that Mutt was still in the freezer. His frozen paws had torn through the tough plastic bag, carving grooves into the ice crystals growing like miniature spears along the inside of our freezer. I didn't tell anyone his body had moved. That sick feeling rose in my chest again as I stuffed him into 3 more layers of bags. If you aren't familiar with the bags we in the veterinary field use after pets pass away, they're made from high-density polyethylene or polyvinyl chloride. They're tough, thicker than sin. It's uncommon for paws to break through the plastic. But Mutt was never ordinary. I think it was a final, fuck you. And well, right back at you, Mutt. Since Keaton wasn't picking up the tab, I offered to cover the cremation costs. I wanted those ashes in an urn. For some reason, that felt important. Something bigger than myself. Something I couldn't explain. I didn't feel relieved when they hauled Mutt's body bag away with the 2 other dogs I'm convinced died because of him. I kept hearing Keaton's words ringing in my ears. You've gone and made things so much worse. His southern molasses drawl. Mocking, laughing. A sick bastard. The clinic seemed to calm down at first. At least for a couple of days. I began to relax. Angie, my coworker and friend, approached me. Did you hear how Ryan did it? I shook my head, quieter than usual, trying to show her I wasn't interested. Part of me blames myself for his death. I know how irrational it sounds, but the human mind is a sinister thing. Grief doesn't care about logic. It only cares about consuming, taking, destroying. She continued. He stabbed himself with a letter opener. My cousin works as a highway patrol officer. He got all the details on it. It's horrible, Allison. He stabbed himself so many times. Please stop. I can't. The tears were already welling in my eyes. She reached out a hand to comfort me, but I brushed past it and locked myself in the bathroom. I spent 10 minutes gripping the sink, struggling to steady my breathing. The rest of the shift passed without incident. It was monotonous and calmer than it had been since I shot Mutt in the hallway. Angie was working a back-to-back double that night, something that had unfortunately become more common in recent years as our clinic struggled with chronic understaffing. They asked if I could cover another shift too, but I said no. After everything I'd seen, everything I'd done, there weren't enough sane pieces of me left to give. That night, I settled into bed, my gun tucked under my pillow. The trailer was quiet, just the sound of wind outside, a high-pitched whooshing that rattled the walls every so often. But I found it almost soothing. As I lay there, closing my eyes, I saw a snarling, statuesque black Rottweiler, eyes like 2 bottomless pits. He moved through the trailer toward me, his presence a creeping weight in the dark. Then I looked down. Instead of paws, he had 4 pale hands, their flesh blending seamlessly into the black fur of his limbs. He strode forward. I couldn't move. Every muscle in my body locked up, frozen in place as he slunk beneath the foot of my bed. I tried to open my eyes, to wake up from the nightmare, but they were open, and I wasn't sleeping. A hand rose over the mattress edge. Another followed. I felt the weight of them press down, the mattress sinking beneath an unseen force. It felt so real, too real. Then the snout emerged, slow and deliberate, rising above the sheets like a shark breaking the surface of the ocean. It drained the room of anything good, anything right. Only the ache of loneliness remained, a gnawing darkness spreading through me. I felt like I was sinking into a bottomless pit, falling endlessly. The stench of rotten meat filled my nostrils. The grinning maw loomed inches from my lips. Eyes burned into mine, wide and unblinking. A string of drool pressed against the skin of my neck. The mouth began to open, yawning. Each serrated edge gleamed in the moonlight, lining the jaws in jagged, overlapping rows. The clicking of bone filled the silence as the jaw pried open past natural limits, tendons slipping and joints straining. It kept widening, the gaping maw stretching farther than anything human or animal should be able to. Hot, damp breath washed over my face. My teeth clenched. The mouth inched forward, slow and deliberate, savoring the moment. Every nerve in my body screamed to move, to fight. But I was frozen, paralyzed beneath the weight of its presence. The gaping maw hovered inches above my face, the serrated edges of its jaws twitching in anticipation. I could see the glistening sinew stretching as the jaws prepared to snap shut, feeling the unbearable heat of its breath seeping into my skin. A low, guttural growl rumbled from deep within its throat, vibrating through the mattress, through me. My pulse pounded against my temples, drowning out everything but the sound of that grinding, clicking jaw. Then my phone rang. The sudden chime shattered the moment, a blinding flash of light flooding the room. The weight lifted in an instant. The monstrous shape dissolved like mist, vanishing into the shadows as if it had never been there. I was moving before I realized it, gasping for air, clutching my chest. My heart hammered within me like the hooves of a warhorse, my limbs trembling as I scrambled upright, searching the darkness for any lingering sign that it had truly gone. Had I experienced sleep paralysis? Something worse? I heard my trailer door slam shut. I picked up the phone and flicked on the lamp by my bed. I heard a loud wailing siren and the sound of wind on the other line. My eyes were too blurry with tears to read the contact name. Oh, Allison, fuck. Check the news. It was Dr. Harkham. He sounded out of breath. I grabbed my remote and flicked on the television and thumbed it to a local news station. Dr. Harkham breathed heavy in the background. We are here on the scene of what is now suspected to be an incident of arson. Firefighters struggled to put out the blaze, although they stopped it from spreading to nearby buildings. I felt the world glaze over. I watched a team of yellow-clad firefighters picking through the cinders of my old workplace. God, half the roof was slumped in. The place was licked with flames. I recognized little pieces of a much larger puzzle, smashed and burned. I still clutched the phone to my head as I watched the firefighters pick through the ruins of an intimate part of my life. It was gone. Just like Ryan. Angie. She didn't make it out. Dr. Harkham choked out a sob. A man who I'd worked with for years and had never seen shed a tear before began sobbing on the other line. This was a 60-something ranching vet who didn't take shit from anyone. A man carved out of the New Mexico dirt, tougher than the rest of us. And he was crying. I steeled myself, choking back my tears. Angie had been a friend, closer than Ryan. She'd burned to death in that building. What happened? Tell me everything, I said, forcing down the swell of emotion. I think it was that creepy bastard, that blonde motherfucker Keegan. We were working the shift when a container of gasoline with a lit rag was tossed through the back window into the doctor's office. It engulfed the place in flames in seconds. We lost some patients too. His voice wavered, struggling to stay steady. I don't know who would do that. Why? What did we ever do to that inbred piece of shit? so senseless. God, I told the police everything. This was beyond them, beyond what the police could understand. I'd sound insane if I told them everything. Even after I'd blown Mutt's jaw apart, I had omitted so much from my statement. Keaton didn't need a motive. He felt like it was ancient, a force of chaos that existed only to sow pain and reap a harvest of blood. He didn't need a reason, Doc. Not to drop off that monster. Not to burn down our clinic. He wanted us to suffer. He wanted to watch us die. Dr. Harkham was silent for a moment, my words hitting him like a blow. I have to go, he finally said. The police need a more detailed statement. Be safe, Allison. The line went dead. Another victim. Angie. Gone. Another life swallowed by the plague of tragedy I couldn't begin to understand. My hand trembled, not only from the horror of what I'd experienced, but from the weight of everything I'd lost. From the thought of Ryan's brutal self-destruction. Some creeping apocalypse had wandered into my life, and it was clear now it intended to stay. I couldn't sleep again. I didn't even try. My phone buzzed with texts from friends, family. One missed call stood out. My old friend Joe. Navajo Joe, we used to call him. Always with a grin. He'd just laugh, that handsome, tough bastard. I should have called them all back immediately, but I had other more pressing things to do first. I gathered my belongings, flipped open the cylinder of my revolver, and loaded a cartridge into each chamber. The compact 9mm felt solid in my grip, its matte finish worn smooth from years of use. Despite its small frame, the steel carried weight, reassuring and steady. I tossed a couple of ammo boxes into my purse, the rounds light but lethal, their copper-jacketed tips catching the dim glow of my bedside lamp. From the top of my cabinets, I pulled down an old wooden cigar box. Inside was a couple $1,000s I'd stashed away for emergencies. If this wasn't an emergency, I didn't know what was. I sat on the porch of my trailer, a cigarette pinched between my fingers, watching the sun claw its way over the horizon. Smoke curled into the air, twisting in the breeze, vanishing into nothing. By the time morning fully arrived, I'd burned through the whole pack. I checked my watch. The crematorium would be opening soon. They'd taken Mutt's body a couple of days ago. I needed to convince them to put Mutt at the top of the cremation list. My old Buick truck started with a low rumble, the engine purring to life. A gift from my late father. It had been his pride and joy. I reached up to adjust the rearview mirror and froze. A spiked black collar hung from it, tags jingling softly as I brushed against them. Mutt, and below it, Keaton's number. I recognized it immediately. The same one we tried calling at the clinic when he abandoned that thing on us. Not a dog, a thing. Where my fingers touched the collar, a biting chill crackled against my skin, like dry ice burning on contact. I rolled down the window and flung it into the scrubbed brush. It didn't make me feel any better. He had gotten it back. I'd placed it in the cremation bag with Mutt. But somehow it was here, which meant he'd been here. Inside my car. Inside my home. Maybe that thing in my trailer hadn't been Mutt at all. Maybe it had been Keaton. Mutt was just the beginning. And this was spiraling into a situation I couldn't contain. At least, not alone. I pulled out of my small patch of land, kicking up a flurry of red dust. My air conditioner hummed. My fingers drummed against the steering wheel. 30 minutes later, I pulled up to the animal crematorium, a sunken gray cement building casting a wide shadow in the heat haze. I stepped out and tried the door handles. Locked. I pressed the doorbell and heard a faint jingle inside, but the lights were off. I checked my phone and swore under my breath. I'd been so lost in my own thoughts, I'd completely forgotten it was a federal holiday. No one was inside. Veterinary clinics contract with crematoriums, sending euthanized pets in sealed black bags. We store them in freezers until the company's van arrives to collect them. They're packed alongside animals from other clinics, then stored in even larger freezers at the crematorium until it's their turn for processing. It can take weeks to complete a cremation, but Mutt had only been here for a few days, and somehow I could feel him inside the building, like I was standing too close to a live wire. The offshoot road I'd followed was empty. In the distance, I could see the glimmer of traffic, but it was far enough away that no one would witness what I was about to do. I circled the building, checking for an alarm system. Nothing. Peering through the windows, I scanned the interior. No cameras either. Crematoriums aren't exactly prime targets for thieves. Nothing to protect except frozen animal corpses. At the back, I found a window. Above me, only miles of empty blue sky. The air still except for a faint breeze curling through the scrub. I crouched and picked up a stone the size of my palm from its resting place beside a cactus, weighing it in my hand. Then I hurled it through the glass. The window shattered unevenly, jagged shards left clinging to the frame like teeth. I found a stick nearby and used it to knock away the worst of them before pulling myself up and climbing through. Glass crunched beneath my boots as I landed inside. The rock I'd thrown had skittered across the floor, coming to rest far across the room. The space before me stretched out like a cavernous warehouse. To my left, 4 massive crematorium units, metal doors dull in the dim light. To my right, an entire wall of freezer units stood silent and still. Steel girders loomed overhead, casting long, skeletal shadows against the walls. It felt like I had walked into a place I wasn't meant to be, like intruding in a place that had been waiting for me. The silence wrapped around me, thick and uncertain. My heartbeat thumped against my ribs, steady but insistent, like a distant war drum. Behind me, the wind whistled through the broken window. Then the smell hit me, the thick, sickly stench of rot, like a corpse left too long in the sun, its hollowed skin splitting open, brimming with writhing black flies. The air crackled with the sound of unseen maggots popping and shifting. A sudden thump made me jerk toward the freezers. One of the lids lifted, then fell with a hollow clunk. I watched, my breath caught in my throat, as the white top rose and dropped again like a mouth opening and closing. Then another freezer began knocking against itself, and another. Then they all started. The sound grew into a chaotic, discordant symphony. The freezers shuddered, vibrating against the floor, scraping and twisting from their original positions. Then, all at once, the room fell still. Silence dawned. Then, with a deafening crash, the first freezer that had started thumping was hurled 10 feet across the floor. It flipped onto its side, metal screeching as it scraped across the concrete, body bags spilling from the burst seam. It slammed into one of the crematorium units, the impact tearing the freezer door clean off. The lid skidded across the floor, crashing into the wall with a metallic clang. And in the middle of the wreckage lay the triple-bagged corpse I recognized all too well. Mutt. His body was rigid, frozen stiff inside the thick layers of plastic. The paws pressed outward, twitching. I heard bones grinding, joints twisting, the sickening sound of something forcing itself to move when it shouldn't. The stiff limbs pushed against the plastic like a baby kicking from inside the womb. I felt eyes on me, burning pupils watching from behind. Shadows stretched and shifted in my periphery, but I couldn't take my gaze off the thing in front of me. The dog I had shot, the one with the caved-in skull, the one I had pumped full of euthanasia solution. the one that had been locked in a freezer for days. I spotted a square point shovel leaning against one of the cremation units, caked in ash. I grabbed it, feeling the rough handle bite into my palm, and charged forward. I swung it down with all the force I could muster. The first strike split the thick plastic, sending frozen chunks of flesh spraying across the floor. Mutt's ruined head tumbled free. His frost-glazed eyes caught the dim light, and his shattered lower jaw smacked against the concrete, twitching. It was too frozen to bite, too stiff to do anything but thrash in mindless, spasmodic movements. My pulse thundered in my ears. The wind outside howled through the broken window, its pitch rising into something shrill, almost human. The shadows behind me deepened. I swung again. The shovel blade carved through tendons, severing the spine at the neck. The paws inside the torn body bag spasmed, clawing at nothing. I kept going, hacking away at the frozen flesh until the head detached completely with a final, sickening crunch. The wind howled louder, but I could sense that it wasn't only the wind behind me anymore. I turned. Keaton. He loomed in the broken window, impossibly tall, his body twisted to fit through the jagged frame. One hand gripped the windowsill, fingers digging into the crumbling concrete, the other obscured in the shadows. His filthy blonde hair hung limp over a face that wasn't quite human. His neck stretched forward, grotesquely elongated, the vertebrae bulging beneath thin, sallow skin. It didn't just extend, it coiled, folding over itself like an accordion, fluid yet wrong in every conceivable way. The angle of it made my stomach twist. His eyes were red, raw. Pools of blood where the white should have been, and they pinned me in place. The pupils were black, dull, the color of tarnished coins left to rot in the dirt. He inhaled, slow and deep, dragging in the air like he was tasting it. And then, his lips split apart, curling into a grin that stretched too wide, splitting cheek to cheek as if his skin could barely contain it. His chest heaved, a silent laugh rippling through him. And his head, God, his head, was so much closer than it should have been. His clicking, sinuous neck had stretched impossibly far into the room, casting a long, warped shadow that swallowed the space between us. Mutt's body writhed behind me, flopping against the concrete like a fish without a head. The sickening smacks echoed through the cavernous room, each one more desperate, more wrong. I backed away from Keaton, slow and deliberate, my pulse hammering in my ears. He didn't speak. He just breathed, deep and slow, savoring the moment, drinking in my fear like it was red wine. The wind whispered through the broken window, stirring there between us. Then his other arm rose, unnatural in its movement, the elbow joint clicking as it bent at a disturbing angle. His hand curled around something, lifting it up like a prize. At first, I couldn't make sense of it, a dark, matted thing, limp and swaying slightly. Then I saw how his fingers had sunk into it. His middle and ring fingers were buried deep in gaping eye sockets. His thumbs screwed into the crown of the head like he was gripping a bowling ball. The realization hit me like the blare of a car horn on a pitch-black road. A head. A human fuck king head. The jaw hung slack, twisting from side to side with every minute shift of Keaton's grip. Blood clung to the torn skin in slick, wet strands. I knew that face. Dr. Harkham. The breath hitched in my throat, and I staggered back without thinking. A mistake. White-hot pain seared through my calf. A vice clamped down on my leg. My brain scrambled to catch up with what had just happened. I looked down. Mutt's severed head clamped onto my ankle, his mangled jaw locking in place. Torn flesh barely held the structure together, but the grip was unrelenting, teeth buried deep. Pain flared through my leg, hot and immediate, the pressure tightening like a rusted bear trap. Keaton laughed. The sound curdled the air, high-pitched and jagged, warbling between something human and something that had never been. His entire body quivered with the force of it, his grotesquely long neck arching like a bridge, vertebrae rippling beneath stretched, paper-thin skin. The ridges of his spine pressed outward, shifting unnaturally, jutting like knuckles ready to crack. I swung the shovel down on Mutt's head, the impact shuddering through my arms. His jaws only clamped tighter, and I felt a fresh rush of warmth as blood trickled into my boot. Gritting my teeth, I pried at the head like opening a clamshell, peeling it from my leg. It took a strip of fabric and flesh with it as it crashed to the floor. Snarling, I wedged the shovel between its upper and lower jaw, pressing down with my full weight. Bone splintered, the jaw cracking apart with a sickening pop as the lower half disconnected completely. Keaton howled with laughter. It was a riot to him. He shook with it, body convulsing, that awful neck writhing like a snake. I swung the shovel sideways, aiming straight for his grinning face. But before it could land, his neck snapped back, recoiling too fast, retreating into the night. The shovel flew from my hands, clattering against the wall with a metallic clang. He lingered in the window, looming, watching, waiting. Shouldn't have killed it. You started something you can't finish, little miss. Shoulda let it feed until it was done. Then I'd have picked it up. His voice rasped like a snake's hiss, slithering into the space between us. His head retracted, impossibly smooth, that too long neck drawing back into the night. His hand peeled from the windowsill, talons scraping against the concrete, leaving behind deep gouges in the stone. Behind me, the thrashing body stilled. Silence settled, thick and suffocating. I didn't dare turn around. Not yet. I braced myself, waiting for the inevitable, for Keaton to slip back in through some unseen opening, to drive those jagged fingernails into my spine, to tear into me with his yellowed, animalistic teeth. But nothing came. My breath left me in a shudder. My body screamed for me to move, but the lingering presence of him made my muscles coil tight, every nerve waiting for the strike that never landed. Finally, I forced myself to turn. Mutt's body lay still. Whatever had been animating it, twisting it into something beyond death, was gone now. For good, I hoped. I limped toward the nearest cremation retort, my leg throbbing with every step. My hands trembled as I fidgeted with the loading door. It clunked open, the hinges groaning, and I slid the roller tray out. Mutt's head went in first, his detached lower jaw following. His body came next, heavier than it should have been, dead weight sinking into the metal. The pain in my leg flared, sending hot sparks of agony shooting up my thigh. But I bit down against the pain and shoved him all the way inside. Fumbling with the control panel, I pressed the buttons, praying I got the right sequence. The burners roared to life, the chamber flickering with searing orange light. Heat pulsed outward, warming my skin as the fire licked at the corpse. I staggered away, limbs shaking, and made my way to the office break room. The drawers rattled as I tore them open, my hands shaking too much to be precise. Gauze, scissors, bandages. I grabbed everything I could, then hobbled back to the retort. Collapsing beside it, I pried off my boot, wincing as blood dribbled onto the floor. The sock beneath was soaked, the fabric clinging to my skin. I exhaled deeply, then reached for the scissors, snipping my pant leg above the wound before peeling it away. The damage was worse than I thought. Blood pooled in the puncture wounds. the torn flesh already darkening with bruises that spread outward like shockwaves from each ragged tear. My calf throbbed in time with my pulse, sharp bursts of pain radiating up my leg. The bites might have been deep enough for stitches, but I didn't have time for that. The jeans had saved me from the worst of it, though the shredded fabric clung to my skin. Soaked through, I pressed gauze against the wounds, wincing as fresh blood welled against the white cotton. I wrapped a compression bandage around my leg, tight enough to slow the bleeding, but not enough to cut circulation. Antibiotics or lidocaine would have been a blessing. I could have stitched it myself if I had to, but a crematorium didn't exactly keep medical supplies on hand. I leaned my head back against the wall, exhaling through clenched teeth. My ears rang from the heat, the exhaustion, the pain. And then I heard it. A scream. Distant, warped, twisting through the air like the high-pitched wail of logs splitting in a fire. I turned toward the retort viewing window. Inside, Mutt's body writhed as the flames engulfed him. The hairs curled first, blackening before catching fire, the flesh peeling away in layers. His limbs twitched, shuddering, the last vestiges of unnatural life refusing to die easily. The stench of burning fur and charred meat turned my stomach. I forced myself to watch as the thing that had haunted me was reduced to nothing more than a skeletal frame. Eventually, there was nothing left but black soot clinging to the glass. The steady hum of the cremation unit filled the room. I let the heat seep into my bones before finally pushing myself upright, limping toward the control panel to shut everything down. By the time the retort had cooled enough to retrieve the remains, the sun was sinking below the horizon, the sky smeared with a hue like burnt orange. Keaton hadn't come back. Yet. I grabbed a shovel and a garbage bag. The retort door groaned open, and I scooped out the calcined bones, brushing away the brittle black remnants until all that remained was pale dust. One by one, I fed the remains into the cremulator. The machine whirred, grinding the fragments down until every last piece of mutt fit into a bag just slightly larger than my hand. I stood there for a long time, gripping the bag in my blood-stained hands. Keaton had slunk away into the night, but I knew this wasn't over. I thought about Ryan, Angie, the dogs, my clinic, reduced to nothing but cinders and ruin. I'd lost so much in just a few weeks. Too much. Half my life was gone in an instant. I felt too hollowed out to even cry. Ripped out of my life in an instant. No rhyme or reason to it. He could have killed me. Easily. He was toying with me, like a cat slapping around a finch with a broken wing, each swipe landing harder than the last. Soon, I reckoned he'd start biting. I gritted through the pain as I pushed the freezer back into place, the weight of it straining against my injured leg. Plugging it back in, I reloaded it with black body bags, setting the torn-off lid back on top like a makeshift seal. The air reeked of blood and freezer burn, and of the dust blowing in from outside. I found a broom and a mop, doing what I could to clean up my blood and mutts, which had thawed into a dark, congealing slick on the floor. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. Stepping outside, I checked both ways. Nothing but dirt and desert weeds stretching into the distance. The silence out here wasn't comforting, it was heavy, pressing down like a held breath. The dread never left. Sliding into my car, I turned the key. The engine rumbled to life, a sound that grounded me, if only for a moment. I set Mutt's bag of ashes on the passenger seat, staring at it like it might start moving again. Then I saw something in the footwell, something round, hollow sockets where fingers had pressed deep and firm. Dr. Harkham's head, a parting gift. Bile rose in my throat, but I swallowed it back, forcing my breathing steady. I'd had a tough life growing up. I knew how to push things down, bury them deep. I grabbed an old jacket from the back seat and tossed it over the round heap. At least I didn't have to look at him like that anymore. Then, I did the only thing I could do. I called the one person who might be able to do something about this. The only one who might be able to pull me from the riptide I was drowning in. Joe, my buddy from high school. I hadn't talked to him in years, but I'd missed his call this morning. That had to mean something. The dirt road stretched toward the main highway as I drove, my hands gripping the wheel tighter than they needed to. He picked up on the second ring. Allison. Thank God. Tears welled at the corners of my eyes. God, Joe, it's been so long. I saw the news. I know you work there. I had to see if you were okay. Joe, I need to talk to you. Something's after me. It's been after me since I first saw it a few weeks ago. I need your help. A dog came into my clinic. Bad fucking luck. Thing turned the building into a slaughterhouse without so much as a blink. Silence. The joy in his voice faded, melted away like chocolate left too long in the sun. Outside, the sky burned with the last light of day, the sun dipping toward the edge of the world, flaring one final orange goodbye. That's not just bad luck, Allison. That's something else. Something old. That's bad medicine. Joe clicked his tongue, the same way he used to. The sound hit something deep in my chest, a crack in my ribs I hadn't noticed forming until now. I should have called him sooner. Maybe things would have turned out differently. Maybe not. You got my address? Come down to the res. I'll make sure they let you in. His voice was steady, familiar. Safe. He gave me directions. The Navajo reservation a couple hours to the southwest. I've got some ashes too, I said. My fingers tightened around the small bag beside me. I cremated his dog, the one he brought into my clinic before all this shit went south. Joe went quiet for a moment. Then, softer this time, not a dog. He didn't elaborate. Not anymore. A sharp, blistering pain grabbed my calf. I sucked in a breath, my leg shivering, nerves screaming as if a white-hot blade had been pressed into my skin. I yelped, "Allison?" Joe's voice sharpened. The pain spread like fire, radiating from the bite wound, sinking deep. My pulse hammered as I clutched my leg, fingers pressing into the fabric of my jeans. But nothing stopped the burning. Then, from the darkness of the footwell, something shifted. A wet, gurgling croak, a jaw working. I froze. Joe must have heard it too. His breath hitched, sharp over the line. A slithering rasp clawed up from beneath the jacket I'd tossed over the thing in the footwell. The sound of dry lips parting, of a raspy voice speaking through a mouth that shouldn't be able to talk anymore. His voice. My breath stilled inside me, a hollow, empty space opened in my chest. Keaton. He was talking through lips that didn't belong to him. Lips that once belonged to Dr. Harcum. The weight of his amusement pressed down on me, thick and choking. A grin curled in the dark, unseen but felt. The voice slithered through, dripping with something close to excitement beneath the folds of my jacket on the floor. Slightly muffled, but clear enough to hear. I'm really starting to enjoy this game.
Please subscribe to the channel, like and share to receive more stories. Thank you and have a good night.